everybody. We are back with another episode of Quarantined Coaches. This time we are in Tampa, Florida with assistant coach Alan Kunkel from South Florida. How are you, sir?
Good, Josh. I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Why do they call it South Florida when it's not in South Florida?
Funny, I didn't know even when I took the job. Going through orientation, I did find out that when they established the school, there wasn't a school south of Gainesville. So they chose the name University of South Florida. It was the furthest, or it was the southernmost school at the time, and so be it.
Wow. I have lived in South Florida, heck, right next to you, for all these years, and I've always wondered that question. And
I did as well.
I really asked it out of kind of tongue in cheek, and there was a real answer for that. I love it. How are you enjoying it up there? This is your first year, not only as a college coach, but living up in Tampa. How's it going?
So far, so good. I go to work every day and really enjoy the people that I work with, not only a part of our coaching staff, but in the office, in the athletic office in general. Tampa's different. We feel like we're in the wilderness by comparison to living in Fort Lauderdale, a mile from the beach. But we've had some new encounters with coyotes and alligators and bobcats. You name it, we've seen it.
Nice. So today I try to get different angles every time we film one of these, and I thought you would be great to talk about your transition from the high school game to the college game. You have a laundry list of success and accolades at the high school and the travel level. Your last job before South Florida was at Calvary Christian Academy, where I believe you won 2 state titles, correct?
Yes, sir.
You guys were ranked, I mean, you were at the top of the national rankings. So why leave?
It was always a goal for me. Going all the way back to my days coaching in Orlando, I think that ambition and aspirations of building programs at the high school level and, seeing where that took you, trying to again, like anything else, you settle in a job and you settle into an occupation. You want to continue to challenge yourself at higher levels. And so I love teaching. For the last 14 years, I taught chemistry, run science departments, worked alongside very, very dedicated educators, coached alongside very, very dedicated coaches, both in the travel ball and the high school world. But I think you also come to a point where you want to challenge yourself. You want to see what it's like to again, continue to gain knowledge, not only in the game, but gain knowledge in terms of leading young men. And I just think it was a natural progression.
And so there's plenty of younger coaches out there who have the same aspirations, right, to work their way up through the game. How do you make that jump? Like, you talk about the natural progression, like what would be the steps to take to get through the ranks to the college level?
I think really anything, it's working hard and putting in your time. The reality of it is that, there were moments over a 10 or 12 year, time in high school baseball where, this opportunity may or may not have ever presented itself. You get to a point where you think you've accomplished something. You've been kind of at the pinnacle of travel ball. You've been at the pinnacle of high school baseball, and you've interviewed for some jobs, and some no's have come along the way, and things didn't fall the way you wanted them to. And there were moments over the course of that time where I thought, I'm going to be a high school coach for the rest of my life, and I would have been just fine with that. I loved being at Calvary. I loved the kids that I went to battle with every day. I loved building that program and obviously working alongside my assistant coaches there. I mean, we built a family and we thought we had something great there. And you just continue to push and push and push. And finally, the door opened for me. And again, I wasn't looking for it at that time. There were moments where I was looking for it. I went and interviewed for it. I was disappointed that the interview didn't go my way. And then I finally just kind of settled in with what we had built at Calvary. very much loved being there and enjoyed my time there, and thought, man, I could be here for, 20, 30 years. I could retire here. My kids went to school there, and loved it there. At the time, my wife was working there as well. So, what a great spot, right? And again, this just kind of came out of nowhere, to be honest.
Right. If I'm trying to get to that rank, or because this is your first college coaching job, correct?
At the Division I level, I did spend 1 year between Orlando and South Florida as an assistant at the junior college level at Seminole State.
Okay, so that's still a big jump. What is it, do you think, that's on the resume that gets you hired here at this level? Like, for you personally, what are some of those key things that is, that's what a college coach looks like?
Oh man, honestly, I think that's different for every college head coach. I think they're looking for people that they can trust, for people that they know will work hard, and they know this game, is always going to take a toll on a family. Especially if you're married and you have kids like I do. I mean, I have 3 daughters, all under the age of 13, and the time that is required away from home, recruiting, obviously being on the road during a college season, takes its toll on the family. And I think, your wife is probably the unsung hero of all of this. But I think when going out and looking for, what those qualities are, being able to work with people, being able to guide kids, being able to guide, young men, 18 to 23, to be able to walk into a program and earn their respect, earn their trust, to be able to work alongside of them and help them chase their dream. Obviously, there's going to be a part of it is going to be evaluation of players, and being able to get out and work events, work travel ball events, work for a travel ball program, to be able to go out and recruit teams, and to be able to put very, very competitive teams on a field. I think there's some element of that, or at least having the ability to go out and evaluate the type of player that would perform well and compete well within a conference. And so, that's going to be critical. I was fortunate to be able to be an associate scout for a couple teams for a little while, and to be able to work alongside of the area scouts in that respect, and go out and work hard for those guys, and learn what they're looking for. And so, I think any opportunity for you to kind of diversify yourself in the game from an evaluation standpoint, from a skill development standpoint, from a people development standpoint, is going to provide you at least some of the fundamental qualities that it would take to be successful at this level. I think a lot of it is luck, being in the right place at the right time, and probably more importantly than anything else, or most importantly, building relationships with college coaches and earning, the opportunity to get in front of them to interview for a job.
You talk about leading young men and being able to develop talent is obviously an important part of, the job. From a personality standpoint, you go from the head coach of a high school team at a very successful private school, to the new assistant at a college level. How does your personality have to change in relationship with the boys to be successful, or does it not change?
Man, Coach Mole's been really good to me, and is constantly reminds me to just be myself. But you do have to change a little bit, in the sense that, for the last 4 years, I have been in charge. I've been the one developing those practice plans and disseminating them to our assistant coaches, and kind of laying out that roadmap, laying out that progression. And like you said, being in a private school, you're laying out that progression from 6th grade to 12th grade. You're not just talking about a JV and a varsity program. You're trying to lay out what that looks like from your middle school program on. And it takes time. I think that, the one thing that I've had to adjust to is obviously being an Indian. I've had to go from being a chief to being an Indian, which, there are moments where, you fall back to that type A personality of, okay, I'll just get it done, and I can do X, Y, and Z. But I do have an overseer, and I do have other assistant coaches that I have to work alongside. And if you look at it just in terms of years at this level, I have the least amount of experience. So, having to be humble and just realizing, okay, Rome wasn't built in a day. You're going to have to kind of look at it from outside of the box and realize that, this isn't the way that I've done it for the last, 4 years at Calvary, 10 years as a high school coach. But these guys are knowledgeable. They know what they're talking about. They've been doing it for a while. So, sit back, kind of follow the plan, be involved in the plan, instruct the way the plan has to be instructed or developed in order to, obviously meet whatever the, program direction is, and kind of go from there.
What about your personality or your relationship with the players? Because you go from dealing with, teenagers and, where they are in their development as just a young man to dealing with 20, 21-year-old young men. And you go from being the head coach where there's got to be that little bit of that fear, I guess, from your players sometimes, to as the assistant coach, you're the one who should really kind of be in the trenches and not friends with them, but more buddy kind of relationship than the head coach would have. Have you noticed yourself evolving in the way you have a relationship with the players?
Sure. It's been a little bit of a challenge. It's as a high school coach, the head coach, you're the disciplinarian. You have those boundaries where, not only are you developing the culture of the program, but you're developing the boundaries in which coaches need to fall within and the players need to fall within. So it's a little bit easier, I guess, in that scenario when you're in charge to maintain that boundary. And really that boundary is just respect, right? You're trying to raise young men, and you're trying to really, more than anything, make sure that they're set up to be good husbands, to be good fathers, to be very, very productive people in the community. And so you develop your culture around, work ethic and integrity and desire to achieve whatever your talents can allow you to achieve. And there's always that buffer as a head coach, because when those kids cross the line of breaking whatever, team rules are, or not meeting expectations, there always has to be a consequence. And I think because I've been doing that so long, it was initially a little bit of a challenge to have to just report on the kids, or to go to our head coach and say, hey man, Johnny, is not meeting the demands or meeting the expectations, and instead of handling it. And I think a lot of times, when you're dealing with 18 to 23-year-olds, you can handle it in a discussion. Hey Johnny, you're not giving me great effort today. You need to pick it up. But if it's habitual, then we have a problem. And being that guy for the last, I don't know how many years, whether it's travel ball or high school baseball, that has had to deal with most of those conversations. It is a little bit of a change in how you go about it, because really my job at this level is to, build strong relationships with those kids, and to, not be their buddy, but be a mentor. And in that respect, though, I'm still not the disciplinarian.
What about the coaching side from an X's and O's standpoint? Like, how have you had to change, or what is the big difference in developing the players on the field, the skills of a player?
I think the biggest change, to be honest, is as a high school head coach, you're looking at everything from a 30,000-foot level, and you're communicating with your assistant coaches, and you're allowing them to develop everything at the positional level. And I am observing, I'm watching, I'm trying to touch point with all of our kids. If you had 30 kids in a varsity program or in a, high school program, I'm trying to make sure on a daily basis that they're working hard, that they're getting the reps that they need offensively and defensively to accomplish, our task, which is to go out and compete well. I'm planning practice. I'm talking to our assistant coaches to make sure that they're equipped, that they have all of the necessary tools that they need to develop that skill set, or to um, maintain whatever skill set that they've been working on for the last 2 or 3 days of the week. And so transitioning from a high school head coach to a Division I assistant, now I'm responsible for position groups. And as a guy that's traditionally been a hitting guy, as a catching guy, I'm now responsible for the catchers and the outfielders. And so I've had to learn a lot. I've had to make phone calls. I've had to talk to guys that are outfielders. I've had to work alongside with our coaches that have coached outfield play. And so you look out and you forget sometimes some of the things that you did early on in your coaching development to develop position players, whether they're infielders or outfielders or catchers or pitchers and so on, because I wasn't, day to day in the trenches with the outfielders at the high school level. I mean, if anything, I worked with our catchers tremendously and worked with our hitters, and would kind of sprinkle in time with our infielders, would sprinkle in time with our outfielders. We had a great assistant coaching staff. And so I would spend moments and we would talk about things that we really needed to help develop because of, maybe we had an issue or something that occurred over the course of the game. In last night's game, we weren't backing up bases efficiently. We didn't get behind the ball to make an accurate throw to third base, whatever it may be. But I wasn't directly involved every day in the skill development. And so I really had to go back to the basics and reteach myself some of the things that, to be honest, I either forgot about or never really knew about outfield play because I wasn't an outfielder.
Right.
And go back and really get back to the basics and the fundamentals with catchers at our level that I don't know. At the high school level, I was very, very fortunate to start at Calvary with a guy that really ended up catching for a 4-year period for us, and getting in the trenches with him, and being able to kind of mold and shape him to the point where last 2 years of his high school experience, I never called a pitch. He called every pitch. He really commanded the field, and it was, again, a trust that was developed between he and I. And so now you start from scratch all over again with a catching core who you may or may not have a strong relationship, a strong connection with, and going back in and diving deep in with those guys and trying to earn their trust and getting back to the basics and the fundamentals.
How different does a practice look from the high school level to the college level? Like, obviously the speed of the game is different, but I would imagine, like, one of the things that drives me crazy watching high school games is how many first and third trick plays, leave early, like all these things they're working on. I mean, is that something colleges are working on just as much, or what does their practice look
I can't speak to that directly. I could say that no, we don't work on those types of things as often as I've seen them and you've seen them at the high school level. I think the biggest challenge transitioning from high school to college is the hour limits. In the high school level, kids are in class for 35 hours a week, but they're on the field for 30, 40 hours a week. And at the high school level, kids would keep asking coach, can I get some more BP? Can I get some more BP? Can I get some more BP? Can I get some more ground balls? Can we work on that skill development a little bit more? And even though practice was over, you'd still always have 3 or 4 or 5 kids, depending on the day. And it could be the same 5 kids, or it could be 5 different kids that always wanted more reps. And so, that practice allotment would be really dependent upon your time as a coach. At the college level, the one thing that I've really kind of come to grips with is you have to be very, very creative to really develop kids. There are allocated amounts of time that we can be on the field, and kids are in the classroom for 12 or 15 hours a week, and we're only allowed to be on the field with coaches during instructional time for 20 hours a week or 8 hours a week, depending on the time frame of the year. And so, you're going to have to communicate well with kids in terms of where they're lacking in skill or what their strengths are, so that they can go out and work on those things on their own. And so, I find that to be probably the most challenging thing at times, because kids do want more. You build up good relationships with 18 to 23 year olds, and that you build trust, and they want more. They want to spend more time with you. They want to be able to go in the cages and work with you. And once you've reached those time allocations, you can't go back in the cages and continue to work with them.
What do you miss about the high school game?
Man, I miss the locality of it. I think, the rivalries, the kids, the community. Those kids for the most part grow up in those communities, and they grow up playing travel ball together, or they grow up playing, and Legion ball doesn't exist anymore, but they grow up playing at those,
It
little league
does
parks.
still where I live, but not down there anymore.
Yeah. And so, when you go play, you 2 or 3 or 4 games a week, whatever it is, those kids all know each other. And the competitiveness is, at least where I was in South Florida, the competitiveness was, in my opinion, second to none. And you go and you watch your kids compete against other kids they grew up competing against, and it means something to them every day. It's emotional. And, a lot of the coaches in those areas, man, they grew up coaching down there. They grew up playing down there. And so, there's history there. There's rivalries that exist, 20, 30, 40 years. And I think that was very, very cool. I also think that the communities of support, meaning parents, surrounding community that would attend games, the camaraderie, of the area scouts, and I think I miss all of that. That was pretty cool to see, to watch that community kind of work hand in hand, and I guess, not in the everyday baseball sense, but even when tragedy strikes. A couple years ago, we had some hurricanes roll through South Florida. Puerto Rico was hit pretty hard. Calvary had partnered with Chaminade, and we came together and provided some hurricane relief packages that were sent down to Puerto Rico. And so stuff like that is fun. The community outreach events that we tried to annually do while I was head coach at Calvary, I think that stuff is lasting, and it means something because it attaches you to the community. And there's time for that. Haven't experienced how much time there is to do that at the college level yet.
That is a phenomenal answer, and not one that I would ever think of, and that's why I ask you, who's going through this experience. What do you not miss about the high school level? Or not to put it in such a negative light, what do you enjoy more about the college level?
I think that I enjoy being able to dig into the game. Being a classroom teacher, teaching chemistry for the last, 10, 12 years, working through department meetings and having to stay after school at times for staff meetings, left less time for me to evaluate video, to make some of the phone calls that I felt like were really, really necessary to move my kids from the high school level to the college level. And we were as successful as I think any high school in doing that, but it still took additional time, and it took time away from my family. It took time away from some other things that I could have been doing because I had to utilize that time to do. Now you go into the office and there's more paperwork than I could have possibly imagined. There are relationships within the athletic office that I never even thought about once the veil had been torn back. But there are lots of moments where you can watch video. You can utilize some technology like Synergy, and obviously watch game film and try to help your kids be more efficient hitters, or to evaluate chase rates and things of that nature, where as a high school coach, you don't have the technology for the most part. You don't have the time to really sit back and evaluate game after game, swing after swing, defensive play after defensive play. And so I think this has allowed me to develop a little bit more of that coaching IQ, to be able to utilize some of that technology and really spend more time on the X's and O's and the game of baseball that I wasn't able to do as a high school teacher, that spent half the time teaching and half the time coaching. And so you really are able to focus a little bit more on your passion rather than, hey, I do this in order to do this.
So simply put, this is more baseball.
Yes, sir.
Gotcha. You've been on the high school side, on the travel side, and you've been helping kids get recruited and go to college, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you're in that role, it's a totally different role, right, than being the recruiter. And I think, do we think one way on this side, and then you get to the other side and you realize, oh, I didn't understand? Have you had any of those moments?
I haven't had any of those moments yet, Josh, to be honest, because at the end of the day, as a travel ball high school coach that's calling college coaches or that's being called by college coaches about players, you still have to build up enough credibility and rapport with those coaches from an evaluation standpoint to direct them in the right path. The one thing that I've really come to understand is really at the college level from a recruiting standpoint is it is about relationships. If you don't have those strong ties, if you don't have those relationships, you can look at recruiting sites and you can go on Twitter and you can go on, some recruiting websites and try to evaluate video and try to evaluate kids from that perspective, but it's almost like finding a needle in a haystack. The thing that we know about today is there's nothing that's going to be hidden, right? I mean, good players are going to be found. They're sending out video on social media and stuff like that. But the one element that I think is a little bit harder to grasp or is really harder to evaluate are the intangibles, right? I mean, we're all looking for guys that have arm strength, that have good secondary pitches, that have bat speed, that can run, that have arm strength. We're all looking for those guys. And the challenge that we face isn't a shortage of athletes. It's really, really finding out if their character, their integrity, their desire to be student athletes really translate at our level, because it's harder. It's, classwork is harder. Managing time becomes harder. Having to be a self-starter is now very, very important. Having to be internally motivated is now very, very important, because we may only get, 2 or 3 or 4 looks sometimes to make a decision on a kid. And it may be his 2 or 3 or 4 best outings of the year. It may be his 2 or 3 or 4 best games of the year. And so the alternative of that is, we've gone out, we've watched a kid, we've heard he's a tremendous kid, but every time we go out, he's struggled throwing strikes, or he gets hit around a little bit, or vice versa. He isn't very successful at the plate. So then we become, evaluators of character. How do they respond to that adversity? And I think that can become a challenge at times, because there's not enough time. There's only 3 countable coaches that are going out recruiting. So, we have to rely on that high school coach. We have to rely on that travel ball coach. We have to rely honestly on guys that are developing kids in batting cage scenarios, or in a not necessarily a travel ball scenario, but in a lesson scenario. Hey, I work with this kid every day. I know a little bit about him. I know his character. I know his family. His family's awesome, and so on and so forth. And then we can kind of build our recruiting notes from there, and continue to follow them. But it's still a relationship driven business, and
right.
I'm going to lean on you to point me in the right direction for high caliber players. I'm going to lean on the high school coach, and a lot of times that high school coach may tell me, hey coach, yeah, he's my best athlete, but you may need to stay away from him. He's not a very good student. He does not respond very well to coaching. He doesn't respond very well to his teammates. And honestly, we hate hearing that, but it saves us and the player a lot of heartache on the back end, because the worst thing that can happen is he comes to school and all of a sudden becomes a tough student athlete to manage, and we have to part ways, and nobody wants that.
Makes complete sense. Last question for you. We're going to pretend I'm a young coach, have coached some travel ball, 10, 11, 12 years old. I just got a coaching job at a high school, head coach, but it's not the greatest high school in the world. And I'm feeling a little stuck right now, feeling a little pigeonholed at not a super talented high school. I'm not with any crazy travel organization, but I'm trying to work my way up that ladder and get to a college coaching job. What should I be doing?
Keep working, keep learning, go to ABCA conventions, go to, some of the Barnstormer events, call college coaches and try to pick their brain. To be honest, I think all of us love talking to other coaches and talking hitting and talking defense and talking about player development. If you go on Twitter right now, you can get involved in a million different Twitter hitting wars. You can get involved.
I go on Twitter sometimes.
You can, you have to find ways to invest and invest in your future, right? And so you're going to have to build that network. You're going to have to build your high school program. And I think anytime you walk into a high school program, regardless if it's a high school program that's been successful or one that you're going to have to rebuild, it's going to have to be a 3 to 5 year plan. And, I think some of the mistakes that I've made in the past is thinking that things are always going to happen very quickly. And it just doesn't always work that way. Sometimes you got to put in that time. Sometimes you got to learn, you got to grow, and you got to be stretched. And so sometimes those, those opportunities don't come as quickly as you would like them to come, but you can't lose heart. If that's where you want to be, you continue to push and you continue to learn and you continue to grow. There's a million different travel teams out there. And you might not be with the travel program that you want to be with now, but again, keep calling on those guys that own those travel ball programs and find out ways to get involved, whether it's starting out as an assistant coach and then working into a 14U team or a 16U team or a 17U team, whatever it is that you feel like is going to give you the experience that you need in order to continue to climb that ladder. I think that's what's important.
You did not disappoint, Coach Kunkel. I knew you wanted a completely different angle and a completely different audience we can deliver this message to, because a lot of what I've done in the past is delivered to the player, is delivered to the family, and I think this is phenomenal. It's delivering something to the young coaches and explaining, how you go through that. And thank you for coming on here, and thank you for doing this today, man.
Hey man, thanks for having me. And, it's been an honor, obviously, to, build our relationship. I remember, a few years back when you lived right behind the school that I coached at and just showed up at a practice, and now look at us now.
I was thinking the same thing, but I didn't want to say it. Thanks again, man. You be safe.
Yes, sir. You too, man. I'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Bye-bye.